What if the story of the very first Americans has been wrong for 100 years? For decades, we were told one simple story. Ice Age hunters walked across a frozen bridge from Asia. They came through a narrow gap in the ice. They spread out and became the first people in the Americas. That was the official story. Every textbook taught it. Every museum displayed it. But now, deep in the hills of Idaho, archaeologists have found something that breaks that story apart. A settlement, fires, tools, bones, all buried for over 16,000 years. And the dates do not fit the old timeline at all. If this settlement is real, if the dates are right, then humans were living in America thousands of years before anyone thought possible. That means someone got here first, someone we never knew about. And the biggest question of all is still unanswered. Who were they, and how did they arrive before anyone thought it was even possible? This is not science fiction. This is real archaeology, based on real digs, real bones, and real radiocarbon dating. For years, this discovery has quietly shaken the world of American history. Scientists have argued over it. Skeptics have tried to disprove it. But Testy, after test, keeps pointing to the same shocking conclusion. People were living in North America far earlier than the official story allowed. In this video, we are going to walk through exactly how this discovery happened. We will see what the old theory said, why it was believed for so long, and how one quiet dig beside a river slowly tore it apart. We will look at the evidence piece by piece, the stone tools, the animal bones, the fire pits. And we will explain in simple terms why so many experts now believe this changes everything we thought we knew about the first Americans. By the end, you will understand why archaeologists call this one of the most important finds of the last 50 years. So let's go back to the beginning, back before this discovery, back to a time when scientists thought they already knew the whole answer. For most of the 20th century, there was one accepted story about how humans reached the Americas. It went like this. During the last ice age, huge sheets of ice covered much of North America, but sea levels were much lower than today. That meant a strip of land connected Siberia to Alaska. Scientists called this land Bridge Beringia. The idea was simple. Ice Age hunters from Asia followed. Herds of mammoths and other big animals across this bridge. Then, around 13,000 years ago, a gap opened in the ice sheets covering Canada. This gap became known as the Ice-Free Corridor. Hunters supposedly walked south through this corridor, out of the ice and into the heart of North America. Once they arrived, they left behind a very special kind of stone tool. It was a spear point, carefully shaped on both sides with a small groove at the base. Archaeologists named it the Clovis Point, after Clovis, New Mexico, where it was first found in the 1930s. For decades, wherever a Clovis Point was found, scientists assumed that was the earliest evidence of humans in the Americas. This idea became known as the Clovis First Theory. It was taught in schools, it was printed in textbooks. It became almost like a rule that could not be questioned. But here's where the story gets interesting. Not everyone agreed. A few archaeologists kept finding strange clues that did not fit, layers of soil with tools in them that seemed older than the Clovis timeline, charcoal from ancient fires that dated back further than it should, bones with cut marks that suggested human hunting, but from a time before Clovis hunters were supposed to exist. Most of these finds were dismissed. Critics said the dating must be wrong. They said the layers of soil must have been mixed up over thousands of years. They said the evidence was too weak to challenge such a well-established theory. For a long time, that response worked. The Clovis First theory held strong. But then, a team of archaeologists began digging at a quiet spot in western Idaho along the banks of a river. The place was called Cooper's Ferry, and what they slowly uncovered there would take years to fully understand. But once they did, it could not be ignored. Cooper's Ferry sits where a small stream meets the Salmon River, deep in Idaho's rugged canyon country. It is a beautiful, quiet place, steep hills, fast-moving water, thick forest in the summer. It does not look like the kind of place that would rewrite history. But for early humans, this location made perfect sense. It sat along a natural travel route. Rivers like the Salmon and the nearby Columbia River system flow all the way toward the Pacific Ocean. If early humans did not walk through an icy corridor in Canada, but instead moved slowly down the coastline, following rivers inland as they went, then a spot like Cooper's Ferry would have been a natural resting place. It had fresh water, it had fish, it had access to game animals. It was sheltered from the harshest weather. In other words, it was exactly the kind of place ancient travelers might choose to stop, build a fire, and stay for a while. Archaeologists led by Lauren Davis from Oregon State University began serious excavations at Cooper's Ferry starting in the late 1990s. At first, progress was slow. Digging through layer after layer of ancient soil takes enormous patience. Each layer has to be carefully removed, recorded and studied before moving to the next. It is not like the movies, where treasure is found in a single afternoon. It could take years just to reach the oldest layers safely, but as the team dug deeper year after year, they began to notice something strange. The deeper layers were producing tools, not modern tools, not recent tools, very old, very simple stone tools, unlike the famous Clovis points found elsewhere in North America. And the deeper they went, the older the layers seemed to be. That raised an important question. Just how old were these tools really? To answer that question, scientists needed to date the site properly. The main method they used is called radiocarbon dating. It works by measuring a special type of carbon found in anything that was once alive, like wood, charcoal, or bone. Over thousands of years, this carbon breaks down at a steady, known rate. By measuring how much is left, scientists can calculate roughly how long ago something died or burned. It is one of the most trusted dating methods in archaeology. At Cooper's Ferry, the team collected charcoal and bone fragments from the deepest layers where tools were found. These samples were sent to specialized labs for testing, and when the results came back, they were stunning. The oldest layers were dated to more than 16,000 years ago. That is roughly 3,000 years earlier than the traditional Clovis first timeline allowed. 3,000 years might not sound like much on a calendar, but in human history, it is enormous. It is the difference between simple villages and the first great civilizations. It meant that people were living in the interior of North America thousands of years before the so-called first hunters were supposed to have arrived. At first, many scientists were doubtful. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and archaeology has seen false alarms before. Critics raised tough questions. Could the samples have been contaminated? Could younger material have somehow slipped into older layers over time through animal burrows or natural shifting of the soil? These are fair questions, and honest scientists ask them about any big discovery. So the Cooper's Ferry team did not just publish one date and stop. They kept digging. They kept collecting more samples from multiple layers, multiple locations across the site, and multiple types of material. They cross-checked results using different labs, and the results kept lining up. Layer after layer, sample after sample, the story stayed the same. Around 16,000 years ago, and possibly even a little earlier, people were living, cooking, and making tools at this exact spot in Idaho. This was not one lucky sample. This was a consistent pattern. As the picture became clearer, the researchers realized they had found more than just old dates. They had found signs of daily life. In the deepest layers, they uncovered evidence of at least one fire pit, blackened by ancient burning. Around it were scattered stone tools. Some were simple flakes, sharp enough to cut meat or hide. Others were more carefully shaped points, though very different in style from the famous Clovis design. This detail turned out to be extremely important. If these people had arrived through the same ice-free corridor as the traditional Clovis hunters, you would expect them to be using similar Clovis-style tools, but they weren't. The tools at Cooper's Ferry looked more similar to older tool styles found across the Pacific and Japan. That single clue opened up a whole new possibility. What if these early Americans did not come from an inland route through Canada at all? What if they came along the coast? This idea is called the coastal migration theory. Instead of walking inland through an icy corridor that may not have even been passable that early, groups of people could have slowly traveled along the Pacific coastline, using small boats or simply walking along exposed shorelines and river valleys, moving south from Asia toward the Americas over many generations. Along the way, they could have followed rivers inland, just like the Salmon River leads travelers straight to a spot like Cooper's Ferry. If this theory is correct, it would explain why the tools at this site look different from classic Clovis points. It would explain why humans appear here so early, well before the inland ice corridor would have been usable. And it would completely reshape how we imagine the very first journey into the Americas. Instead of one dramatic walk through melting ice, we would be looking at a slow, patient migration along the edge of an ocean, generation by generation, family by family. But that wasn't the only surprising find at Cooper's Ferry. As archaeologists studied the animal remains buried alongside the tools, they discovered bone fragments belonging to an extinct species of horse, a type that vanished from North America thousands of years ago. The bones were found scattered near the fire pit, mixed in with the stone tools. This pattern strongly suggests that early humans hunted this ancient horse, butchered it, cooked it, and ate it right there at the campsite. If confirmed, this would be some of the earliest known evidence anywhere in North America of humans hunting and eating one of these extinct Ice Age animals. It is a small but powerful clue. It tells us these were not just wandering strangers passing through. They were skilled hunters, capable of tracking, killing, and processing large animals, using fire for cooking, and clearly organized enough to live, even if briefly, as a working group. In other words, this was not a single lost traveler. This looks like a small community going about the business of daily survival more than 16,000 years ago. As word of the Cooper's Ferry findings spread through the scientific community, reactions were mixed. Some archaeologists were thrilled. For years, they had suspected that the Clovis first theory was too simple, too neat, and too dependent on a single narrow route into the continent. Cooper's Ferry gave them solid, well-dated evidence to support a much older and more complicated story. Other scientists remained cautious. Ben Potter, an archaeologist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, pointed out that while the site was fascinating, it was still not fully clear whether every early date was directly tied to human activity or whether some natural process could explain part of the pattern. This kind of careful pushback is actually a healthy part of science. Nobody wants to rewrite history based on weak evidence. But here is the key point. Even with fair scientific criticism, very few researchers dismissed Cooper's Ferry outright. Instead, most agreed that this site added serious weight to a growing pile of evidence from other locations across the Americas, all pointing in the same direction. Humans were here earlier than the old story allowed. And Cooper's Ferry was not alone. Around the same time, other sites across North and South America began producing similarly ancient dates. In Chile, a site called Monteverde had already been showing evidence of human activity dating back as far as 14 to 19,000 years. In Pennsylvania, a place called Meadowcroft Rock Shelter had long, controversial dates stretching back 16,000 years or more, with some charcoal samples hinting at dates even older still. In Oregon, another site known as Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter produced animal remains and stone tools that some researchers believe could be even older than Cooper's Ferry, possibly reaching back 18,000 years or more. Individually, each of these discoveries faced its own doubts and debates. But together, they began forming a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Site after site, on opposite sides of the continent, all pointing to human presence well before the traditional Clovis timeline. This is where the story truly escalates. It is not just one lucky dig in Idaho anymore. It is a growing wave of evidence, each new discovery adding pressure to a theory that had stood almost unquestioned for 70 years. Then, researchers uncovered something that made the picture even more remarkable. At Cooper's Ferry, scientists compared the ancient tools they found with tool collections from other parts of the world. The closest matches were not from Siberia or nearby regions of North America. Instead, the closest similarities came from tool styles found in northeastern Asia, particularly in areas connected historically to Japan. This detail is extraordinary. It suggests that the people who eventually reached Cooper's Ferry may have descended from populations with roots stretching all the way across the northern Pacific Rim, moving slowly along coastlines over many generations, long before crossing into the Americas. This is not proof of a single, simple migration. It hints at something far more complex. Multiple waves of people moving along. Different paths at different times, gradually spreading across two entire continents. The old story imagined one heroic walk through melting ice. The real story may be closer to a long, patient, multi-generational journey along thousands of miles of coastline, adapting to new environments as they went. This is the turning point where everything about our understanding begins to shift. For 70 years, the Clovis first theory gave us a clean, simple answer to a complicated question. But clean and simple is not always accurate. Cooper's Ferry, alongside sites like Monteverde and Meadowcroft, forces us to accept a messier, more human truth. The peopling of the Americas was not one single event. It was a process. It likely involved multiple groups, arriving through different routes at different times over thousands of years. Some may have come along the coast, some may have used inland corridors once they became passable, some groups may have thrived, others may have vanished, leaving behind only scattered tools and ancient fire pits as proof they ever existed at all. This shift in understanding is not just about correcting an old date on a timeline. It changes how we imagine the courage, skill, and determination of these earliest travelers. They were not simply lucky wanderers who stumbled across a continent. They were skilled survivors, capable of navigating unfamiliar coastlines, hunting large and dangerous animals, and adapting to, with fresh eyes and modern dating techniques. Researchers are digging deeper, testing more carefully, and taking older controversial claims far more seriously than before. Universities and research teams from Oregon State University, the University of Alaska, and institutions across South America are now collaborating more closely, sharing data, and comparing tools and dates across enormous distances. There is also a growing respect for indigenous oral histories, many of which have long described deep, ancient connections to these lands, stretching back far beyond what mainstream science was previously willing to accept. Discoveries like Cooper's Ferry are beginning to build a bridge between scientific dating and long-standing indigenous knowledge, showing that these two sources of understanding may be far more aligned than earlier generations of researchers assumed. Of course, not every question has been answered. Scientists still debate exactly how many separate migrations there were. They still argue over exact dates, exact routes, and how different ancient populations across North and South America relate to one another. Some critics still urge caution, reminding us that a handful of sites, however carefully studied, cannot fully rewrite thousands of years of unknown history on their own. That caution is healthy. Science should always demand strong evidence before overturning old ideas. But here is what most researchers now agree on. The simple, single story of one heroic walk through an ice age corridor 13,000 years ago can no longer stand alone as the full answer. Cooper's Ferry proved that. The evidence in the ground does not lie. Charcoal remembers, bone remembers, stone tools remember, and what they are telling us is that real people with real skills, real courage, and real lives were already living in North America more than 16,000 years ago, long before anyone believed it was possible. So what does all of this actually mean for us today? It means the story of the first Americans is far bigger, older, and more complicated than we were ever taught. It means human curiosity, courage, and survival stretch back further into the past than most textbooks admit. And it means that even now, in quiet places like a riverbank in Idaho, the earth is still holding secrets, waiting patiently to be uncovered. Cooper's Ferry did not just push back a date on a timeline. It reminded us that history is never truly finished. New evidence can still surface. Old assumptions can still be questioned. And sometimes, the biggest discoveries come not from dramatic headlines, but from years of quiet, careful digging. Beside a river most people have never even heard of. Somewhere out there, buried under more layers of soil, more answers are still waiting. And the next great discovery about the first Americans could be found. Tomorrow, next year, or right now in a place nobody has thought to look yet. If this story surprised you, imagine how the archaeologists felt when the test results first came back. 16,000 years is not just a number. It is a doorway into a hidden chapter of human history that we are only just beginning to understand. What do you think? Do you believe there are even older settlements still waiting to be found? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like and subscribe for more.